brief introduction about Cloud4green. We've been here for about 9+ years, and we've been catering all the cloud certifications like AWS, GCP, and we have trained around 20,000 plus professionals. We've helped them to get better jobs and then pursue their career in a better way. And we've helped them reach newer heights in their personal growth when it comes to skill building on your cloud as such, right? As a part of that, we would want to continue and cater towards the society, cater the professionals to give them much more knowledge with respect to Kubernetes and make them very good Kubernetes administrators, not just good with a better quality as such. In order to achieve that, we will be starting Kubernetes trainings as well. And is the reason this small webinar to give you a brief heads up on what is Kubernetes all about and how you must be prepared, right? And for you to choose the same. Yeah. Let's quickly start. Why Kubernetes training, right? I've given a little bit of stats on the right side of your screen that you see. And you see all the graphs have been increasing, right? And it's over a period of time, right? Every company that were using Kubernetes in the past, their pod count has been increasing drastically, right? If you see the numbers, it was 400 just before 1.5, 2 years. Now it's around 1,000, right? So the average number of pods per organization across the globe has doubled, right? And also using auto scaling as a part of Kubernetes has almost doubled. You see, 2 years before it was around 35%. Now it's almost at 40%, right? That's a huge jump that we see. If you see every other organization who used to be on either on Fargate or they used to run on just containers are now gradually moving towards Kubernetes, right? The later part of the graph or the next graph that we have, Amazon ECS users are migrating their workloads to AWS Fargate, right? AWS Fargate is a service specific to AWS, which helps us in Kubernetes, right? And also nearly 90% of the Kubernetes users leverage managed services, right? Like your cloud managed services. And is the reason this particular training plays a crucial role for all of us, right? Even though we are managing our cloud infrastructures, we need to understand the entire Kubernetes because Kubernetes in itself is vast, right? There are dedicated trainings like your certified Kubernetes administrator. There is dedicated certifications that you'll have to do, which is certified Kubernetes security as such, right? And so on and so forth. Let's say 10 years before, there wasn't much focus on Kubernetes. Now everybody speaks about it. Everybody wants to be on Kubernetes. Everyone wants to have their applications hosted on Kubernetes, right? I've been using the word so much of Kubernetes all around, right? Even last week when I was speaking to Ajit that we need to set up this webinar, my kid was next to me. She asked me, Papa, what is Kubernetes, right? You use the word so much. She asked me, what's Kubernetes? I told her it's an open source system for automatic deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. It groups containers that makes up an application into logical units for easy management and discovery. She was like, huh? What did you just say? Fine. Let me give you a small story of a giraffe. Is when how I started to explain her what Kubernetes is, right? There was a giraffe in its own sweet spot, and it had a very small boat in the ocean. It was flying happily in the ocean, right? Now let's quickly try and relate with respect to giraffe and the small boat to what you see on the screen, right? That's what the app itself, a typical application that used to run in case of old times. We used to have the app, we used to have the configuration file, which is your index.php. We used to have the web server and various pieces of the OS, right? Because OS is where you need to install, you used to install the web server as such, right? So this is the old time application, right? So now this particular giraffe with its OS was flying happily, or let's say was swimming happily in the ocean. It met a whale. And then the whale was like, dear giraffe, do you have some place for me in your container, or let's say in your application? Now Giraffe was like, no, I'm sorry, I do not have any space, right? Why? Because my server is just customized for me. I will not be able to use or I'll not be able to onboard any of you, none of you or your friends and so on and so forth. So I will have to be alone for the rest of my life. Giraffe is devastated. Who, any of us, right? We do not want a lonely life, right? Giraffe in a sad mode was swimming alone and its own boat was in the ocean, right? Now what happened? Giraffe got the idea. I cannot be like this, right? I need help of someone. I need to, bond with people. I need to be with people, right? I need to share data. I need to help them, host their own set of applications and so on and so forth, right? And it's how the idea of containers came, right? So containers will have to be managed, but on a side note, networking on containers is kind of hard, right? But then you have the liberty of scheduling, distributing, and load balancing, right? When you say schedule, if you want, let's say, a container A to be up and running at this point in time, let's say a future specific time as such, yes, you can schedule the same. It can be distributed, which means you will be able to run multiple applications using them. And it can also be load balanced, right? So we all know the term load balance, which means the traffic that comes in can be balanced as such based on the load that we have from the incoming set of traffic, right? And the data that has got to do with the container must be stored somewhere. Now, all of this is a headache. Who will help Giraffe to do this? Your networking piece and your database, who will help? It was flying around and its Giraffe saw a huge ship. And that ship was led by a captain called Cube, right? So let's call him Captain Cube. Now, Giraffe told all about its life sorrows, stating, I'm all alone, I don't have anyone with me, I need a place to stay. Now, Captain Cube was, don't worry, Giraffe, I have the right thing for you. I'll be able to give you a place in my ship. And it gave a space, and it gave a space for Giraffe. Now, the ship here is your Kubernetes, right? The bigger ship that you saw, which was led by the Captain Cube, is now your Kubernetes. Now, where did we get this word Kubernetes from? We got it from Greek. In Greek, it means captain or pilot, right? And ideally, the word cybernetic and gubernatorial also comes from the same word, right? So also, there is an alternative meaning for Kubernetes, which is like love of wisdom, pilot life, which means let's consider as the Pirates of Caribbean, the captain that we have there, right? So someone who loves to sail, right? Now, what did Captain Cube help Giraffe in? What it did is Giraffe's name was Phoebe, right? It gave a name tag. It attached a name tag stating, "Hello, my name is Phoebe," and it put it in a room. Now, how Kubernetes will use is it will use the labels as name tags to identify things, right? So let's say just like Giraffe, the container, we would have multiple containers, right? And each of the containers would have a specific name tag, or it would have a specific label as such. And that particular label will be used to query any other specific functions as such, all right? So based on the labels that's given, like let's say my name is so and so, my name is so and so, you will be able to query these particular labels and action upon the same, right? Just like your Phoebe, your Giraffe in the container, in the huge Kubernetes ship, there will be more containers, right? That is what your understanding will be about your Kubernetes, right? You see, this is the bigger ship. You have the Captain Cube who runs the Kubernetes, and you've got a small container where you have Giraffe, right? Now, Giraffe felt home, stating, I have the captain to lead me. I have a very good, small, spacious shape where I could be living happily for the rest of my life. But gradually, what had happened, it dreamt of something. It dreamt of his past life, right? It identified that it was holding a PhD on genetics in his past life. Now it got it thinking, will I be able to replicate myself? Right? Then it got it thinking, what am I? Now, this entire space of giraffe in a small cabin, we will have to call it as a pod, right? You need to understand what a pod is. Now, this particular pod can usually hold any number of containers, but then maximum it would have one or two. You have the liberty of holding many containers, but more of a industry standard practice, we usually go with two. But then most of them will just go with one. Right? Around 80 to 90% would just go with one container per pod, right? So, and then this pod is connected over a network to rest of the environment, right? Now, giraffe got thinking, fine, what will I do with the genetics? Will I be able to replicate myself, right? And maybe I'll be able to arrive at replication with respect to different applications that I would have or different animals that are out there, right? It got thinking. Captain Cube was like, do not worry, Phoebe. I've got the right thing for you, which you will have to call it, or which we can name it as replication container, right? So as I mentioned earlier, right, we can just have one container or we can have more than one containers, right, in a pod. Here we have taken the example of one container in a complete pod, right? So here, what your replication controller will do is, it will give you a pod template, right? What is a pod template? Let's say the entire giraffe setup, right? The entire giraffe setup can be made as a template, and then you will be able to create n number of copies, right? Also, it will give you a logic for scaling the pod up and down, right? And the same thing can be used for rolling deployments as such. Now, all of this is managed by replication container. Just like this, you will have several replication containers in the huge Kubernetes, and each of them will be able to speak to each other, right? Each of it will be having its own web server, each of it will be having a certain pod as such, and the respective configurations of files, and then it proceeds happily. This is how you run your entire Kubernetes setup, right? So you've got pods, you've got replication controllers, you've got containers, you've got specific configuration files, right? Now, as a part of this training, what you would learn is, I've given you a lot of information in the past 15, 20 minutes or so, right? Each of it has a certain configuration. Let's say container, for instance, has a certain configuration that you need to achieve. Web server, certain configuration that you need to achieve. And also there are best practices that you need to go with, right? And in a similar way, you've got pod as well, right? So on and so forth, right? All of these will be covered as a part of the training. How do you configure them? How will you be able to configure a replication control, different two parts, right? How you can have a container up and running, how you can ensure container to container communication, what should be your network interfaces as such, and so on and so forth. This will be the complete training that we will take you through. I hope I was clear on what is Kubernetes and what are the different aspects of it and what are the different glossary terms that we will be using as a part of the training.